الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. We continue inshallah ta'ala with the book تذكرة السامع والمتكلم by Ibn Jamaa rahimahullah. And as mentioned before, we were not going to go through every single part of the book, just the things that might be related to us and we can benefit from it, even if some of the things in the book might not relate to us, like a sukna, living in a dorm or living in a place. But it's important to see these etiquettes and to even get to be exposed to how the Muslims and the scholars used to be upon certain adab hundreds of years ago, because this is something that is important for us to still have, because it's a lineage, it's inheritance that we need to make sure that it's passed from one generation to the other, especially with matters of al-adab. This morning, we had just finished the second chapter from the subject of the adab, or the manners of the student in his own self, and towards second one this morning was towards his sheikh or his teacher or the scholar. And the detailed manners that we heard, it's something that should bring our attention to develop this and to be patient with it. And someone had asked and sent a message, are these etiquettes also to be observed with the parents, or how is it then with the parents? It's the same manners to be observed with the parents too. And as mentioned, that if the alim is, or if the parent are the physical, biological parents for the person, and they're to take care of them is a command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to observe the perfect adab and manners with them, the alim is also considered like a father, but not a physical or biological father, but rather the one that, with regards to one's spirit and one's soul, to be purified with matters of ilm. So these etiquettes, and I hope inshallah ta'ala that everyone will go through them and listen to what is mentioned by the sheikh in the book, to observe it. So it doesn't matter if it's 700 years ago this was written, it's something that needs to be observed today. And one of the things to show again how the perfect manners to be observed when a person even choose his words, if you remember something was mentioned today, if you're talking to your parents, and if you're talking to the scholar or to your teacher, and if you would narrate something to him, hikaya, or someone said something to someone else, when you're giving him a quote, you're saying a quote from someone, you should also pay attention that the quote does not have you in it if it's in a negative way. So you don't tell him, so and so said to so and so, you are lazy. Don't say you are lazy, even though it's a quote. This is not according to the best etiquettes and manners with the scholar, with those who are elders. But rather you can say something like, so and so said to so and so that he is lazy. Right? So even avoiding the word you, so that as if you're not talking to him, even though he doesn't mean it and it's very obvious. But this is something that is in the adab part, in the manners part, not something that you would have, what's the dalil of this and so on. That's why the adab doesn't have to be with an evidence, with everything in it. This is something that with the manners of the person to choose his words, which is the general dalil and adillah, and evidences in the Quran and the Sunnah with regards to observing the best conduct and the best way of speech and things like this. The second chapter, some of the things here also might not relate to us, but we'll try to mention some of them, and there's always benefit inshallah ta'ala, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make it benefiting. The chapter, the title of it, في آدابه في دروسه وقراءته في الحلقة وما يعتمده فيها مع الشيخ والرفقة. His manners, and this is again also to the student, in his durus, in his lectures, in his studying, and his reading in the halqa, in the gathering. Maybe he's asked to read something, whether it's him physically reading or being read to him, because reading doesn't mean that he's specifically reading. One can be reading and everybody's listening, or the sheikh is reading or saying something and they're listening. This is also comes into this meaning. وما يعتمده فيها مع الشيخ والرفقة, and what is to be established with the sheikh, and the companionship, those who are present in the class or while the lecture is on. And there are 13 points here to be mentioned. We had 13 points this morning, and here 13. We won't be able to finish all of them, inshallah ta'ala, but we'll continue later, inshallah ta'ala. The first one, as you see in the PDF, they made like a title to make it easy for us to remember these points. It's related to start with what's important and then what is less important, to prioritize the things that a person starts with when it comes to seeking knowledge. And this is where they call it the manhaj, or the way to seek the knowledge of the deen of Allah. There are certain ways, certain books to study, what to start with, what first, and what comes next. So he says, أن يبتدئ أولا بكتاب الله العزيز فيتقنه حفظا. That he starts first with the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he would memorize it perfectly. And this is always the first step that a person should do when it comes to seeking knowledge. And as ulama, they say, especially if the person is young, especially if he's young, the first thing to start with is to memorize the Quran, and to memorize it in a perfect way before anything else. And with that, as he would say, with the mandatory knowledge. Doing that with the mandatory knowledge, because everybody has to have what is an obligation upon him to know, like the matters of aqidah, how to purify himself, how to make salah, things like this. As the ulama, they say, unless a person is a bit old, so he can doesn't have to work on the memorization of the entire Quran. This might take a long time for him, so he can do it side by side or so. But definitely, as the norm is, unless a person has a special case, or he can ask the person of knowledge with regards to his own self, what should he do? He should start with the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because this is the foundation of every knowledge, and the barakah of it is in memorizing the Quran. And that's also the ulum of the Quran, as he says, على إتقان تفسيره ويجتهد على إتقان تفسيره وسائر علومه, to get the tafsir of the Quran, to understand the Quran and the rest of the sciences of the Quran. Then ثم يحفظ في كل فن مختصرا يجمع فيه بين طرفيه من الحديث وعلومه والأصوليين والنحو والتصريف. The different subjects of knowledge in every fan, in every subject of knowledge, to take a matn that is mukhtasar, not the mutawalat, not the detailed books, but something which is the very first step in every subject. In fiqh, there is the mutun, that is very precise, very short in words, but great in meanings. It's like the laws, where it's very specific and very precise, to memorize it and to be upon it. And this is inshallah ta'ala, the next level. We're not into this level yet, where we would read the mutun the way it is in Arabic only, and to study it. And as you see, the first stage in this is to have the dabt, to read it correct from someone that is well versed in it. Of course, in the matn itself, and what every word means, and how to read it correctly, and to understand every single word of it. And this is in the different subjects of the ulum, whether it's in matters of the hadith and the sciences of the hadith, and matters of fiqh and the usul and the nahw and the tasrif and so on. And if he's studying this, that should not take him away from studying the Quran and reciting the Quran and reviewing the Quran on a daily basis. And this is something that for the rest of one's life, the student of knowledge and everyone should have a portion of the Quran that is recited on a daily basis. If a person memorizes the Quran, then that's not the end of it. This is the beginning of continuously reviewing the Quran. And if someone did memorize every day, even if it's a short portion of the Quran. But this is something that should be done on a daily basis of reading, and each person according to their level. And to be warned against forgetting it after memorizing it, because there's warnings against this. And the other things to be memorized with the advice and with the guidance of the people of knowledge. You need to study this, then study it. Memorize this, memorize it. The mutun, the books of ilm, and to listen to the explanation of it from the ulama, and according to the alim that a person studies from. Some of the ulama, they would make them memorize first, without explanation, to get the memorization first, even of the matn. And they would memorize the entire matn without any explanation, and then they would go to the session of explaining the mutun, and some would take it step by step with memorizing and explaining. So according to the alim that a person studies with, he should follow his way. And of course, as it's mentioned before, to choose the alim that you learn from, and that is to see who is the one that is best in whatever subject of ilm to study from. And that's why the ulama in the past, they would study the aqidah with a specific alim, hadith with someone else, fiqh with someone else. This is in the levels where they become more specialized in all aspects and different subjects of the ilm. And the foundation or the entry level, if it's correct to say, this can be all from one till they take themselves to the next level. And as we're talking about this program, without mastering, without being good in the Arabic language, we're not talking about studying in the sense of being students of knowledge. You're just being dependent on others, like from the masses of the Muslims, that you want to learn your deen, which is fine, but you would only make yourself in the level of learning the necessities and the obligations, and that's it. But to be among the people of knowledge, this is a betrayal to a person to continue without learning the Arabic language, because this is the medium that a person should learn to study the deen as to be a student of knowledge, to be a alim. There's no alim, right, that doesn't master the Arabic language. How can he be a alim of the Quran and the Sunnah if his language is not the language of the Quran and the Sunnah? And that's why the books of knowledge, when it's all translated like this for people to take it as if this is the ultimate and this is the end of knowledge, to be like that, there is if it's correct, it's not servicing the people in the right way. This is not fulfilling the rights of the people, especially with matters of knowledge. So we have to really differentiate between someone taking the path of seeking knowledge versus someone that is just want to learn what's necessary for him for the religion. And the matter is easy. Not everybody has to be specialized in learning the deen of Allah or being a person, a scholar of the religion, and so on. And that's why he also talk about the one that you would seek knowledge from, going back to the subject of having been well versed in the subject and upon deen and salah and righteousness. He mentioned something, again, what we're listening here, we're not wasting our time, inshallah ta'ala, even if it's not related to us, but it's good to hear these types of things, inshallah, even if it comes later. When you're studying a subject of ilm with a sheikh, you should not study that the same thing with someone else at the same time, right? Unless your sheikh tell you, for example, study this with someone else. Because this can cause confusion, of course, to the student, and also makes him not really focused on what needs to be studying and to have his heart focused on one thing. So going from one person to the other and things like this is not what is recommended, especially when a person is beginning studying the matters of the deen. And when it comes to memorization and explanation, to the best of one's capacity, you don't want to do it too much so that you give up, and at the same time, you don't do it so much less that would take away from you perfecting matters of knowledge. And the more the person practices, the more that he would know his limits. We need to struggle. We need to take ourselves to a higher level by struggling and being patient, but at the same time, not to overburden oneself, that a person would quit, after some time. So this is the first point, which is basically going with what is making a priority in what you seek when it comes to matters of knowledge. And for someone to start to learn, he doesn't have that ability. So that's why you ask the people of knowledge. And it's even better that if you ask with your specific means or your status, or people are different, young, old, occupations, things like this. So the ilm, as we heard before, if you give the ilm all of you, أن تعطيه كلك يعطيك بعضه. The ilm will give you some. If you give all of yourself to the ilm will give you some ilm. So imagine if you give some, you get less and less. So there's no limits, right? So nobody will say, this is the way that I'm going to attain all of the ilm. There's no such a thing. So that's why we need to make sure that we don't waste our life in learning, because there's no end of learning. There's no such a thing as, I'm done with learning. So instead of wasting so much time and learning things that is not benefiting, it's important to get this from the people of knowledge in general terms and specifics, because there's so many different manahij and many different ways, and that does not necessarily relate to everybody. So you need to ask that from the people of knowledge. The second point, it's an important point, and as a sad thing that many people that this is again addressing the people of knowledge, the student of knowledge, but many people that are not even into the level of studying the deen as serious, and they fell into that trap, which is to be warned against indulging into the differences of opinions and the differences of statements, and he said this and the other alim said this and all of that. Someone in the path of ilm, being a student of knowledge in his beginning stage, he should be away from this, because that's going to make him waste so much of his time. And this is what the ulama they say. And this is not all the time. This is in the first stage of studying matters of ilm. So this is an important one. He says, أن يحذر في ابتداء أمره من الاشتغال في الاختلاف بين العلماء أو بين الناس. By the way, we are on page 113 if you're following the Arabic PDF, inshallah. أن يحذر في ابتداء أمره من الاشتغال في الاختلاف بين العلماء أو بين الناس مطلقا في العقليات والسمعيات. To stay away in the beginning of his studying, to stay away from being busy with the اختلاف, the differences of opinions among the ulama, not among the no ulama, the juhal, the ignorant ones. Imagine someone is busy with the differences of opinions among those who are not ulama. It's even worse and worse. So he's warning against the ikhtilaf between the ulama, the people of knowledge. If someone is in the beginning route of studying the deen, or bayn al-nas, or the differences among what people say in general, whether it's in matters of beliefs or matters of things of reason and things like this. It depends on what is being said. So that means you study, and that's why it's important to choose the teacher, to make sure that you're studying from someone that you trust his knowledge and his religion. So when it comes to matters of aqidah, you study the aqidah of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. You don't have to start with studying all of the different deviant ways of things and so on. If you're studying fiqh, you study fiqh from one opinion, one madhab, understanding the masail very well first. You're studying. We're not talking about you want to know how to make salah, for example. You're studying to be among the people of knowledge. So you might be you've been taught to do something in a certain way. This is the fatwa that has been established in your locality by the people of knowledge in your place and things like this, which is fine. But when you study, right, and you would say, but what I'm studying is different than what I'm doing or what I've been told. So you start being busy with this. Don't be busy with this. Don't ask even the teacher. You said in the book that this is how to do things, but the alim so and so said, or the what people is not the sunnah because the dalil is this. When you're in a session of learning the matters of fiqh, you are learning in first grade. So you need to perfect the way of understanding the mas'ala. This is the concern now. We're not saying that you're going to be blindly following a madhab and that's it. This is not the objective of this. But in the process of learning, right, you don't learn like this. You have to start first with understanding one way, and then you will get to understand the different things later. And in our level like this is still, even this is an advanced. The next level is to get into the mutun and to only study what's in the mat. Okay. Continuing inshallah ta'ala. And then he says, فإن كانت طريقة شيخه نقل المذاهب والاختلاف. What if his sheikh is mentioning the different opinions and things like this, and he would not give one opinion? He says قال الغزالي فليحذر منه فإن ضرره أكثر من النفع به. He should be warned against this, because the harm that comes from him is far more than the benefit. Again, if you're in the path of studying, the alim also might mention there's differences of opinions for other reasons, so that people don't fight with each other, or so that people be aware of it, because this is widespread. We're not in the session of learning. In the session of learning, you don't distract the students in the beginning by saying all the different opinions and things like this. And this is one of the deficiencies in some of the ways of studying in universities and things like this. They give the students from the first year all of the madhab. They think this is a way to make them more lenient or more tolerant and things like this, but it distract them, doesn't make them lose the way of really establishing the foundation of ilm in the right way. We're not saying you're not going to get it, but just be patient, right? And this is the first year. So in the third year, in the fourth year, right? So it's not about upon being in this way for the rest of one's life that he's only going to know one way and blindly following one way and nothing else. No, this is not the way of knowledge. But in the beginning, this is all about the first stage of learning the masail and the matters of ilm, is to focus on one opinion only, to understand the mas'ala very well and things of that nature. And that's why he says وكذلك يحذر في ابتداء طلبه من المطالعات في تفاريق المصنفات. That he should be warned in the beginning of his study from looking into the many long books, المطولات, the مصنفات that is written details, because that would فإنه يضيع زمانه ويفرق ذهنه. It will waste his time and make him distracted and not perfecting the foundations of whatever knowledge that he's studying. But rather بل يعطي الكتاب الذي قرأه أو الفن الذي يأخذه كليته حتى يتقنه. If he's studying a book, give all of your effort to that book, because this is the book that is chosen to teach for the first level. So give all of your effort to that book, to understand the book perfectly and to perfect it, so that you go to the next one. Why would the ulama then, for the first level of mutun, they would make it something that is precise? And then there is mutawalat, there is things that would require more details and things. They did that for a reason, because this is for the beginners, and then the second level, and then the third level. But when people do not study the matters of knowledge from the people of knowledge, and the alim, he doesn't have to say everything that he knows in the lecture or in the dars. He has to understand and be aware of those who are present. And we are really in a very sad situation. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us. But when you get to the level of studying in English, usul fiqh, for example, usul fiqh to be studied in English, how can that be? When it's supposed to be extremely deep rooted in the matters of linguistics and matters of deen even. Usul fiqh is studied in the proper way of studying the deen later, not in the first even level of studying the fiqh. Studying the fiqh first. And then usul fiqh comes in a second step or a third step. So imagine that it's in a different language even. How would a person understand how to extract rulings and how to understand the evidences and the lights of extracting? This is impossible to happen unless a person would take it in the right route. So this is a very benefiting point here, and also warning against something else. وكذلك يحذر من التنقل من كتاب إلى كتاب من غير موجب. To be warned against from going from one book to the other before finishing it without any necessity reason for it, because also that makes a person waste his time. And alhamdulillah, we're talking about all matters of goodness anyway, right? This is a level, we're not talking about the mandatory knowledge or someone would ruin his life and go to the hellfire. And this is not the subject here. The subject, again, we're talking about someone that wants to seriously take the path of knowledge, to be among the people of knowledge. This is the way to be done. And once he reached the level where he fits and he's able to go from one stage to the other, then this will help him to التبحر, to be more like al-bahr, an ocean, to go into the ocean of knowledge and to be able to benefit from it. And that's why the key years for a person to learn the deen, give him the keys of how to then be on one's own to some extent, where he can research matters and read the work of the people of knowledge and the mutawalat and the long volumes of books and things like this. And with all of that, he should not be ignoring al-amal or actions, because without actions, the ilm, there's no barakah to it whatsoever. So, and you see how with all of this, what he mentioned, he says at the end, وَلَا يَغْفُلَنَّ عَنِ الْعَمَلِ الَّذِي هُوَ الْمَقْصُودُ بِالْعِلْمِ. When a person is busy with studying and things like this, it might overtake him away from acting upon what he learned, which is basically the objective of al-ilm. The third point, and we should revisit these points once in a while, inshallah. If he's going to memorize something, we're supposed to memorize certain hadith, whether it's hadith or mutun or so, he should read it correctly first. This is the same with anything that you want to memorize. If you're memorizing the Quran, what do you do when you're memorizing the Quran? You have to read it to the Sheikh first. You read the verses to the Sheikh first, not just listening to the Sheikh. Listening is half of the way, because you have to recite it yourself to the Sheikh or to someone that knows the matter good, so that he would correct you when you're reciting and would correct your mistakes. And that's why those who would, for example, rely on just listening, no, you have to also recite it to someone to correct you. You might listen perfectly, but once you start saying it, you might make mistakes. So أن يصحح ما يقرأه قبل حفظه تصحيحا متقنا. That means he make it upright what he recites before he memorizes it. Otherwise, he will memorize it wrong. And if you memorize it wrong, then it's difficult to change it. Whether it's to the sheikh or someone that the sheikh would appoint. And this is one of the things, inshallah ta'ala, that we should do when it comes to memorization. People will be in groups. They test one another. They read to one another, especially for those who are able to read the hadith correctly, for example, or the ayat, the verses of the Quran, so that they would test one another before they start memorizing. And then after that, he would memorize it perfectly, and he keeps on repeating it and reviewing it and things like this. And never memorize anything unless you perfect the way that you recite it first. Otherwise, he would fall into tahrif or tasheef, altering the meanings. A tasheef is when things are not written in the proper way. And that's why this brings the subject of the ilm. When it's taken from the books, it becomes very harmful. If a person just taken the ilm from the book, he would make many mistakes. That's why he needs an individual, a person of knowledge, to teach him what's in the book, and one of which is a tasheef. You would read something wrong. Tashkil even can change the meaning of things, and things of that nature. And even the dawa'ir can be different in different places. So this is where correcting, and that's why in their time, when you're reading something to the sheikh or to the person so that you memorize it well, you need to have your pen and your ink, right? And you're sharpening your pencil or your pen so that you make sure that you correct what you're writing. You know, ويضبط ما يصححه لغة وإعرابا, right? Making the i'rab of the words to make sure that it's fatha, not dhamma, and things like this. So you would write it yourself. And the more you put the effort, the more it's benefiting. That's why writing is part of seeking knowledge. Now we have all kinds of ease in reading and things like this. It takes away from even perfecting some of the things that we memorize. Some of the etiquettes here you mentioned, وإذا رد الشيخ عليه لفظة وظن أن رده خلاف الصواب أو علمه كرر اللفظة مع ما قبلها ليتنبه لها الشيخ. Here now you're memorizing something and you're reciting it after memorizing it, or reciting it to the sheikh, and maybe the sheikh, there's two things here. He corrects what you're saying. You should be happy that he's correcting you. Right? Never get upset that he's correcting you, and you should make him at ease that you're happy that he's correcting you. Normal people sometimes, when they're reading, for example, Quran or something like this, and the sheikh is correcting them, they get irritated. So that means what? He will quit correcting them, because they already send a message that they don't like to be corrected. So who's the one that is losing? The one that is learning. So the student of knowledge, he should be very happy. He should even show that he is extremely happy that someone is correcting. It doesn't matter if it's in public or in the halaqah, but because sometimes this is the only way that you're going to be tested. If one-to-one, this is not always an easy thing. So to be at ease with this is not something that is humiliating or anything like this. But what he mentions here is something else. He says that if your sheikh is correcting you, but the sheikh made a mistake, he was not paying attention, right? And instead of correcting you, he's wrong and you're right. But what should you do? Should you say, no, you're wrong and I'm right? No, he says, karrar al-lafza. He should repeat the word again with what's before it, so that the sheikh will pay attention that he made a mistake. Right? So it's just a delicate thing of manners here, but it doesn't mean that you continue and ignore the matter and do what is wrong. Of course not. Or you would mention the correct word as if you're asking. So if he thinks that he was correcting you, but he said something wrong, then you say, isn't it such and such? So you're asking him to benefit. So he would pay attention that he maybe forgot or something like this. Whether it's sahwan or sabq lisan. Sabq lisan, sabq lisan is when you say something when you don't mean to say it. Your tongue get faster than or before you're thinking or something like this. Humans, they are bound to make mistakes. ولا يقول, and he should not say بل هي كذا. No, rather this is what it is. بل يتلطف في تنبيه الشيخ لها, to have gentleness and these types of ways and statements to make sure that it's corrected. Or he would say فهل يجوز فيها كذا, maybe as if the sheikh is saying something and maybe it is to be said in different ways. Whether it's nahwa wise, it can be made the Arab different ways, or qira'ah from the Quran, for example. So you ask him, is it permissible? Is it okay to say it like this or like that? So if the sheikh paid attention and he corrected what he said, mashallah, this is good. And if not, then to correct the matter in a nice way, in a gentle way. Because maybe that the sheikh is right. Or maybe there's more than one wajh, one way of saying it or reciting it. Then we're not just talking about the Quran. And with matters of Nahu, there's different schools even in Nahu and in the matters of Arab and things like this. So this is part of the etiquette here. And if the Sheikh made a mistake or something like this, then he should not continue for the matter to continue to be wrong, because this is betraying also the Sheikh. Whether the Sheikh write it and in a wrong way or things like this, to correct it, but with gentleness and without causing any, saying anything bad or things of that nature. One of the things that they would do if a person stopped in the sharh, for example, to mark where you stopped today, or to mark where you recited for the correction of the recitation. Like, for example, you're reading the matn or the hadith for you to memorize it, but you stopped in a certain word, so you mark that this is where you stop reciting to correct. بلغ العرض أو التصحيح, and they would write this, the تصحيح, correcting my recitation, stopped here or something like this. So this is again with regards to making sure that what you recite is correct for you to memorize before you memorize it. The fourth point is it's a specific subject with the hadith, that you should not wait so long for a long period of time before listening to the hadith. Because the hadith is basically half of the wahy, half of the revelation, Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And as he mentioned, the first thing is the Quran, of course. And when people study matters of knowledge, they normally don't start with the hadith even after the Quran. Like with the Quran, they would study mutun, books that the ulama made as in a summarized way, as we heard before, to establish the foundations of the ulum. And some they would leave reading the books of hadith for later. So things can be, time can passes without a person going through the books of hadith, which is an essential thing for a student of knowledge, to go through the books of the hadith to the best of his ability. And that's what he says here, to take good attention to this matter. والنظر في إسناده ورجاله ومعانيه, and to look into the isnad and chain of narrations and the narrators of the hadith and the meanings of it and the ahkam of it and the benefits of it and the language of it and the tawarikhi, the dates and things like that mentioned like this, which is, of course, as he says, ويعتني أولا بصحيحي البخاري ومسلم, to make sure that he studies al-Bukhari and Muslim first, ثم ببقية الكتب الأعلام, then the rest of the books. See how this deen is preserved hundreds of years, is the same thing. There's nothing new. And this is how the ulama from one generation to the other. Everything else is changing, and except matters of the deen. So the first thing, of course, in the books of hadith is the Bukhari and Muslim. And as he would mention, most of the people, this is mentioned here later on, people, they become more concerned just listening to the hadith, majalis al-sama', which is majalis of barakah, definitely, majalis of blessings, when people are sitting in the majlis where the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ is recited, but they just take it as recitation only. without understanding, without getting to know the meanings of it, even if it's brief. So this is not what is meant. But first of all, he says, then to look into the books after that, like Muwatta Imam Malik, and then Sunan Abi Dawud والنسائي وابن ماجه وجامع الترمذي ومسند الشافعي, ولا ينبغي أن يقتصر على أقل من ذلك. He should not take less than this, as the books like the four Sunan and the Muwatta Imam Malik, Musnad al-Shafi'i, Musnad Imam Ahmad, and the like of these books, and not to be satisfied by less than that. And this can take years. Well, that's why they say طول الأمل is always مذموم. To have a long hope in this life is always not a good thing, because you always have to prepare yourself that in any time you would return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, except in ilm. Except in seeking knowledge, you can have a long hope. You can make a plan for years to come, and Allah knows best who's going to live, because you should not be in haste, because being in haste is not going to benefit you, but it's going to harm you. And that's why he says, after these specific books that he mentioned, وَنِعْمَ الْمُعِينُ لِلْفَقِيهِ, one of the great books to help the person of fiqh is السنن الكبير لأبي بكر البيهقي, and that's for the one busy with matters of fiqh. And there's always this issue when people are busy with matters of fiqh, they might depend, and definitely they should depend on the ulama of the hadith when it comes to the hadith and the adillah. So if they have both, mashallah, this is good. This is good. ومن ذلك, and from that is المسانيد كمسند Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, ibn Humayd wal-Bazzar. And you know the Masanid is different than the other books. Al-Masanid, or when it's called Musnad, means what? It's classified according to the narrator of the hadith, from the Sahabi name, not from a subject. Like Sahih Bukhari, you have Kitab Bid al-Khalq, Kitab al-Ilm, Kitab al-Iman, with subjects. But for the Musnad, is not subjects, it's the narrator of the hadith from the Sahabi. So Musnad Abi Hurairah. So all of the hadith in the Musnad that Abu Hurairah narrated with different subjects. So that's not usually the best way to start, because it's all different subjects, because it's compiled based on the upper part of the narration of the sanad from the Sahabi. So this is the Masanid, and the different types of hadith, books of hadith, of course. ويعتني بمعرفة صحيح الحديث, and to يعتني الاعتناء is to take well care to by knowing the sahih, the authentic hadith, and hasan, which is the level of sahih, less level than the sahih, and da'ifihi, and the da'if, with the different levels, or musnadi or mursali, different types of grading the hadith, what is mursal, what is musnad, wasari anwa'i, and the different types, which is basically the science of ulum al-hadith, which is also one of the things to be studied as a later stage when studying the books of hadith, because this is فإنه أحد جناحي العالم بالشريعة. This is the one of two wings of the Sharia, the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, and of course we have the other wing is the Quran, both a revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as we said, he mentioned this at the end here, don't be satisfied by just listening for the sake of listening without learning, right? And take the time, as like everything else, if you put a set time every day to learn the books of hadith, then you will get it done. And there's ways where the ulama, this is not something that is discovered recently, this is something that has been done by the ulama throughout centuries. So there's a way, very precise way to finish all of the books of hadith. You know, and one of the ways, for example, when he said to start Sahih Bukhari and Muslim, this is a later stage. And that's why we say you might not be related to us at this stage, but you have a Bukhari Muslim, you study them, every hadith. And then when you go even from Al-Bukhari, you go to Muslim, right? The hadith that is in Bukhari, that is in Muslim, right? You don't have to go through it in the same way. So you would just make sure that you take a note of it, but then you would focus on the hadith that is in Muslim and not in Al-Bukhari. And then you go to the Sunan. And the more you go, and then you see what's in Bukhari and Muslim, and for example, Sunan Abi Dawud, and you take note of this. And you would take note of that in Sahih al-Bukhari first. So when they would study Sahih al-Bukhari, they would study all the different takharij of the hadith and all the books. So this hadith was reported in Bukhari and Muslim and the Sunan, for example. So you have it like this. And then you go to the next hadith, is only in Bukhari. So whenever you go to the other books, you already studied that hadith from that other book. So many different ways, or to study the book, one book after the other. And as Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah, he said, من نظر في الحديث قويت حجته. Whoever studies the hadith, his hujjah, his evidence will be strong. And this is, he meant by this is ad-diraya, because there is the riwaya and there is ad-diraya. In the knowledge of hadith, there is something called ilm al-riwaya versus ilm al-diraya. Ilm al-riwaya is the sciences of the hadith, the isnad of it and the authenticity of it and so on. But the ahkam of the hadith itself and what it means and what it refers to and things like this is ad-diraya, which is the objective of learning the hadith. So having both, not just the chain of narrations and the authenticity, but also to understand it and to be able to benefit from it. So this is with regards to listening to the hadith of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. The fifth one is after studying the mukhtasarat or the summarized books and the mutun, then to go to the longer ones and to the high level of learning. And that's also through the people of knowledge. And sometimes the alim would direct the people to search a mas'ala in the longer or the bigger books, and he would direct them so that they don't get again distracted and things like this. And that's of course a level that has to be done in the path of seeking knowledge. And that brings the subject of al-fawaid. When you're writing down benefits, as he says here, when you're searching a matter, for example, when you see other benefits that not necessarily what you're searching for, how to write it down, how to make sure that you don't lose it. And you should not belittle with any benefit or a fa'idah that you would hear, or you get to know a qa'idah or a principle that would makes it easy for you to understand matters of knowledge and things like this. So as you see, just a glimpse of this, there's no time in this life. This is, ilm requires for the person to have tabattul sometime, to be completely given one's life to seek knowledge. Where in the life that a person would have the ability to study all of this? It happens, and it's attainable by the barakah and the blessings and the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and being patient and following the ways of the people of knowledge, so that the person, you get excited. Or we just heard that it's important to study the hadith. So you go study the hadith and things like this without making sure that you study the method of ilm in a good foundation. So you become on your own and you waste your time in a way that you won't benefit from the hadith the way it ought to be. So to be patient and to take, but the thing is not to waste your life. As long as you're busy studying, but with what the ulama and the people of knowledge would advise, you would definitely get to the end of it, inshallah ta'ala. And there's no end of it, but they would make it easy for you to study, inshallah ta'ala. So that's why he says, وَيَغْتَنِمُ وَقْتَ فَرَاغِهِ وَنَشَاطِهِ. Take advantage of the time that you're not busy. وَزَمَنَ عَافِيَتِهِ. When you have health, when you have health, and health is not going to stay forever. And your youth or young years is not going to stay forever. So take advantage when you're healthy, when you're able to focus, and you're young and things like this, and you have less busyness. If you're not married, take advantage of that before you get married. And if you're married, take advantage before you get more busy. And it doesn't mean that you continue to be one state or the other, but you never know what's going to happen. As Umar radiallahu anhu, he said, تَفَقَّهُ قَبْلَ أَن تُسَوَّدُوا. تَفَقَّهُ, basically learn the deen, be among the people of fiqh and understanding of the deen before you become tusawwadu, like sayyid, before you become in charge of something, before you get ahead of something. Because once you become a ra's or a head or a leader or whatever, that would take you away from learning. It would take you away from humbling yourself to learn even. So take your time. Don't be rushing in leading people. Don't rush into teaching people. Don't rush in things like this, but rather be patient in learning. And you'd see that, again, as they say back home, and whoever lives longer, he would see more things. And one of the things that you see clearly, those who, and Ibn Abbas said the same thing. When Ibn Abbas was young, and he was studying from the Sahaba, and he was busy studying, and others weren't, and he would go to them and study from them. But then after years, the people were in need of Ibn Abbas more than anyone else. Why? Because he was busy studying. So the effect of it, if you have two people, one is busy learning. This is his concern, learning. And Allah gave him life, 20 years, say, for example, he's learning. And it doesn't mean that he's not benefiting others. Of course, he would teach others and things like that, but he's busy learning. Versus someone that he was busy giving da'wah and things like this. The benefit to the ummah for the first one is far more than the second one, because of the amount of knowledge that he learned. And at the same time, he did not put himself in a cave learning, but he's not really care about being a leader to the people or teaching the people or being out there going everywhere. Rather, he's busy learning. And that's what Umar radiallahu anhu, he said. وقال الشافعي تفقه قبل أن ترأس. تفقه, learn before you become in charge of something. فإذا رأست فلا سبيل إلى التفقه. Once you become in charge, then there's no way for you to learn, because you're busy now and you're not going to be humbled to go learn matters of deen. Also, to be warned against looking at yourself as you don't need the mashayikh, which is also one of the diseases in the ummah. Among many people, they think that they don't need the people of knowledge. They already figured it out. And you would hear these types of statements from some people. Even people say, we know our reality more than the people of knowledge, so we can figure things out. When they don't even know anything about matters of deen. And as mentioned before, getting a degree from an Islamic university does not make a person alim. Getting a degree where they call it alim, they give him the title of a alim or so, it doesn't mean that he's alim. It's just a title of a degree. It does not make the person alim. And even the ulama, those who made these syllabuses and things like that for universities, it's to give the people the keys to be able to then start afterwards to be able to research and to read and things like this. It does not allow the graduates to be ulama all of a sudden. Right? It teaches them how to then having the keys of ulum, having the keys of the ulum, and it's also different from one person to the other. Person wants to pass on and just to get some grades. It's easy like any other university and things like this. And that's why being with the ulama and having the suhbah, the companionship of the ulama, and learning and having the adab and the manners and applying the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and continuously being in the companionship of the ulama, or having communication with the ulama, not those who would, once they finish, that's it. They're the ulama and there's no more relationship with the ulama, and they're the ones that will give the verdicts and the fatwas and so on. This is a misery to the ummah. And that's why a person should be warned against this. When a person look at himself that he والاستغناء عن المشايخ, it's mentioned there. When a person feels or he thinks that he doesn't need the mashayikh anymore. فإن ذلك عين الجهل وقلة المعرفة. This is what ignorance is all about. عين الجهل. The eyeball of al-jahl, of ignorance. وما يفوت أكثر مما حصل, and what he missed is far more than what he gained. And as Sa'id ibn Jubayr said, and this is a quote that we need to remember inshallah ta'ala, لا يزال الرجل عالما ما تعلم. A man will continue to be alim, a scholar, a person of knowledge, as long as he's learning. As long as he is learning. فإذا ترك التعليم, so if he leaves learning, وظن أنه قد استغنى, and he thinks that he's done with learning, فهو أجهل ما يكون. He is the most ignorant, in an ignorant state that he can be. Right? So the alim is the one that continuously learning. And he doesn't call himself alim because he's continuously learning. Once he says, I'm done with the ta'lim, now I'm the one that is teaching. And that's why people do not realize that the alim, his busyness, he's not busy just when he gives lectures. No, if the lecture is 1 hour a day, for example, the alim is not an alim unless he would read for many, many hours and study for many hours. And he's not luxuriously sitting, just relaxing, because he has to study, he has to continuously learning. And there's no limit to it. So this is the statement. Sa'id ibn Jubayr is a student of Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu. لا يزال الرجل عالما ما تعلم. The man will continuously be alim as long as he's learning. فإذا ترك التعليم وظن, and if he leaves the ta'lim and he thinks that he is استغنى, he's self-sufficient, he is then in the worst ignorant state that he can be in. And that's why the major ulama, this is how their life is. They would learn and they would read and they would continuously to learn. And as the famous quote from Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, when someone saw him with the mahbara, with the pen and the ink, and they said, you, Imam, still going after learning? He said, مع المحبرة إلى المقبرة. With the mahbara is the ink bottle. With the mahbara till the grave. Al-mahbara and makbara kind of sounds the same. So with the mahbara till the grave. That means the learning never ends till a person goes to his grave. So once he reaches in a level of having so much knowledge, then he can look into the different opinions of the ulama, and that also has a very defined process where the ulama, they made it very clear of how to deal with it and how to get into the other opinions and the evidences of others and how to on each one how they responded, and this is mainly matters of fiqh or other things also. We'll take one more inshallah. أن يلزم number 6 أن يلزم حلقة شيخه في التدريس والإقراء بل وجميع مجالسه إذا أمكن. That he should stick to the halaqa, to the circle of knowledge of his sheikh in tadris or reading and so on, all of his majalis to the best of his ability. So as mentioned before, that a student should not be bored of being with the person of knowledge. So to go to the major ulama and to be there for in their lectures and things of that nature, so that they will benefit from them the best. And if he's and not just to go to that one lecture that he's giving, but to do the best he can in whatever the sheikh is giving. And if they are studying, they can, when they take the benefits and the notes, they can, one of the good things that is also mentioned, that they would exchange that with one another. They would question one another. What did he say about this? What is the benefit that he said in this? Can you repeat this to me? And this is the way also to be well established in matters of it. And especially when it's not too long after the dars and things like this. And then he says, وقال الخطيب وأفضل مذاكرة مذاكرة الليل. The best time to study is during the night. And some of them, the early generations of Islam, used to start to study after Isha, and they might continue till Fajr. And again, this is different from one person to the other, but listening or attending the lectures, that's not the only way for a person to learn. So you have to study what you heard and what you wrote and your notes. You have to memorize it, and especially that it's right after you took the notes or the dars. So you have to study it in the same day to the best of your ability. And without that, if we just sit and listen as if, again, there's benefit, of course, in sitting, but if you want to be a person of knowledge, studying is as important as being present in the sessions of ilm and so on. Because this is not just sessions of reminders. These are benefits and things for us to learn, especially with the books and the mutun and the fawaid and the benefits. And that's what he said here at the end. فَإِن لَمْ يَجِدْ الطَّالِبُ مَنْ يُذَاكِرُهُ ذَاكَرَ نَفْسَهُ بِنَفْسِهِ. He mentioned about having to study with someone and to exchange what people study with one another. And if he doesn't find anyone, he should do that with his own self. وَكَرَّرَ مَعْنَى مَا سَمِعَهُ. And to repeat the meanings of what he heard. وَلَفْظَهُ عَلَى قَلْبِهِ. And if it's memorization, to repeat that in his heart, so that it stays within himself. فإن تكرار المعنى على القلب كتكرار اللفظ على اللسان. He's saying here to repeat the meaning on the heart. It's like repeating the words on your tongue. So the meaning of what is being said, to remember that and to be upon it. وقل أن يفلح من اقتصر على الفكر والتعقل بحضرة الشيخ خاصة ثم يتركه ويقوم ولا يعود. Very important point that he ends this 6th point by saying, very rare that you would find someone successful in seeking knowledge if he's only focused at the time of the dars, at the time of listening to the lecture and studying with the sheikh. And then once he's done, goes the book and he doesn't do anything to it to the next day. Even in the worldly matters, it doesn't work that way. So you have to have your notes. Without notes, there's no learning, there's no studying whatsoever. You have to have notes, you have to have your book, you have to write your notes, you have to make sure that every word is clear, and what extra benefit is mentioned, then you write it down, and then you study it. You study it later and you compare it to what the book is and things of that nature. Otherwise, it's very difficult to be successful without these means. So this is in the sixth point about being in the halqa or studying with one's companions and things like this. Then after that, in number 7, you will talk about some of the physical etiquettes to be established when a person comes to the sessions of knowledge, which is something that we need to also observe, inshallah. And if someone doesn't have it, we don't have these etiquettes yet, it's okay to be patient with one another to learn it. And the one that doesn't know, he should learn and to humble himself. And when he knows it, he would practice it, inshallah. So stop here, inshallah.